So welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. My guest here is James Mishra. He is a former software engineer at Uber, and he's currently working on a startup. Really excited to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. What are you most excited about right now?
That's really deep. A whole lot of things. I'm really excited about, I guess, AI. There's been hype about it for 30 years, and a lot of us are sick of hearing about it. But we truly are at the point where the computers are getting fast enough, and the data sets are big enough, and we're good enough at math. And I think the turning point is now.
And what does that turning point look like?
I guess the biggest example is what's already happened with facial recognition. A couple of years back, Facebook beat human performance for recognizing faces. And
is that static faces, or have we also gotten to the point where we can measure the change in that computers are better at monitoring the change in somebody's face over time?
So I don't remember the specific result for that, but Google Photos clearly identifies baby pictures and connects them to adults. And I don't know how they do that.
Okay, so I'm actually asking a slightly different nuanced question to that, which is, so that's a really interesting one that I wasn't thinking about, from baby to adult. What I was talking about, humans get most of their emotional cues from watching other people's faces, particularly the eyes. I was reading somewhere yesterday, I think it was in a Wired article about AI, that computers are good at the static, just recognizing a face, but they aren't yet good at watching that humans are still better at watching emotional reactions in time, basically.
Yeah, I don't know about relative performance for that, but a lot of the research around deepfakes helps build the infrastructure for that.
That's a really interesting. So yeah, the deepfakes are doing that essentially, because they are merging the face over time. At least they're producing that using software. What, for non-technical people, what is the most important thing they should know about AI?
Basically, the way I see how every single AI algorithm has worked for about 30 years is that we want to climb a mountain and get from the ground to the top. And the sort of destination, or like sort of beating human performance, is this top of the mountain, and we started at the bottom. But the catch is that it's a really foggy day, and we don't know where the mountain actually is. But we're very proud people, and we say we're going to do this anyway, and we'll make the assumption that as long as we're going uphill, as long as we can feel ourselves, on this incline, and we can we're sweating because we're going up instead of down, that it must be in the direction of the mountain. And in so many disciplines, it works exactly like that. We've really optimized, going from the bottom to the top when it comes to certain computer vision tasks like facial recognition. But for language, that's a little harder. Sometimes we get stuck on a medium-sized hill or a small hill. And once we're on top of that hill, going anywhere looks like we're going back down. So that when we're on that hill, it feels like we're at the top of the mountain, even though we're not.
And why is it important to go up the mountain?
Well, that's sort of the answer to the question of what we're looking for, or like if we want to recognize faces really well, the top of the mountain is like doing that goal. It's the solution to facial recognition, or NLP, or understanding sentences.
So I interviewed Stephen Wolfram, the founder of Wolfram Alpha, a few days ago, and he gave me some really interesting insights, which seem relevant here, which is that computing, like you're saying, is getting so good that it can do the tasks that we want it to do. So then the main challenge becomes figuring out what we want. And figuring out what we want is a very deep philosophical question for both an individual and for a group. What do you think about that analogy? Do you think that's a accurate assessment of what computers are doing for us?
Yeah. So in the narrow technical sense, what I do when I train algorithms is I actually shape the terrain. I try to flatten out all the little baby hills and make the mountains steeper or higher. But then I guess he's talking about the more general case where, you know, how do we know these algorithms are not biased in ways that are uncomfortable for society or unethical? And, you know, really, we have no idea how to shape the mountain like that.
That's what he said, is that essentially we as human beings have to define that, because that is a socially, you know, I've been talking a lot about recently about how we have natural laws of the universe, and then we have social dynamics. And that ethics question seems to be one of social dynamics. Not to say that there are not things that are essentially right or wrong to do in the moment, but in this sense of how we're going to train computers, it is kind of an open field as to what we want them to do. And that ethical question becomes a very big question. What do you think the importance of ethical training among engineers and people building this technology?
That's a really complicated question. I mean, of course, you know, the ethics matter a lot, and historically, we have not focused about that enough. That said, I don't know if a lot of the exact details we're hashing out will be what we want to do in 20 years, or, you know, I think we're working on the first draft. And that's uncomfortable because, you know, if someone like me wants to say, you know, I don't agree with, you know, with this ethical idea, it just sounds unethical. But really, you know, in medicine or in the military, you know, they have very strong codes of ethics, but it took them hundreds of years to build, you know, the idea of what is a war crime, or, you know, what is unethical in medicine. And those fields have the strength of those principles after building them from a long time.
That is a very interesting point. And now technology and culture are starting to, what I see is that technology and culture are starting to this extremely quick feedback loop, whereas before, you know, thousands of years ago, it would take 100 years for some major change to happen. And, you know, it could happen more than one person's lifetime. And now that period of time between that feedback loop between technology and culture is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so essentially we don't have I'm going to assume that we don't have the time to essentially go through hundreds of years to find out the ethical implications of technology. But then there's another point, which is that it is very difficult to know what the outcomes of what we're building will lead to. So for example, Facebook, you know, I don't think Mark Zuckerberg or anybody else knew that they were building software that was so open that anybody could, you know, create a post and do all these things that allowed people to do things that are mediated by algorithms and mediated by the software instead of being mediated by other people. I don't think they realized how that situation could be gamed. Do you think they were aware of the potential backlash or the potential implications of that technology?
Any platform that sells advertising knows this. That's the value proposition of the advertising. If I want to do a huge ad campaign, the whole idea is that I am influencing millions. And on these, on Google, you know, the ads look like search results. On Facebook, the ads look like posts. Same thing with Twitter. So it follows that, you know, organic posts can do this too.
And what you're saying is, so they did know that because there's the advertisement part, but then there's the bot part, and that wasn't as much of a problem on Facebook, but it was very much a problem on Twitter, which you could create fake accounts. I would love to. I just got reminded of. I would love to have a conversation about where that goes as AI gets smarter in these bots. Do these bots have more potential for being more convincing replications of other human beings?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook and Google both really benefited from the product intrinsically fighting fraud. On Facebook, you connect pretty much only with your friends, and they all have their real name and their real photograph, and they connect with everyone else as your friend too. It's hard for a bot to sneak in and become your friend unless you truly just want to friend anyone. and a lot of people do. And then on Google, it's basically the same thing where popular pages link to other popular pages. And if you're just some random person that creates fake things. And of course, people have all kinds of search engine optimizations to try and climb up to the top of the results. But then Google figures out something else and they push them back down.
And so but Twitter didn't have that. Twitter had essentially had a more open platform, so they allowed a lot more bots in, correct?
Everyone on Twitter can be anonymous. Until recently, you didn't need a phone number or anything. Now they do. And everyone on Twitter can go viral, and you don't necessarily follow your friends.
So it's a much more open system, which is actually kind of why I like it more. But that open, and this goes into something I've been thinking a lot about, which is that my personal degree of openness is trending more towards higher and higher openness to whatever is happening, which is really interesting. But then there are also pitfalls to that. There are also negative problems. So, and I want to make sure that we touch on the question I asked you before about as we go into the future and AI gets better in these open systems, will a bot be able to take on more human characteristics, and will it be harder and harder to decipher whether you're communicating with a bot or whether you're communicating with a real human being? But then also I'd like to explore this question of openness as an individual and what that leads to, whichever one you want to do.
Yeah, so first of all, in openness, that's really hard in social networks. So many of my female friends just hate using Twitter. They get all these DMs from men that are very inappropriate. They get replies from humans or bots that are actively threatening or violent. There's a psychological cost to the openness Twitter has, but on the other hand, Twitter's done a lot of stuff related to the Arab Spring or political revolutions that wouldn't ever happen if you just connect with only 100 friends.
That is very interesting, and thank you for bringing that up. That I didn't really realize that as a man, it's pretty different for me being open, because I do get random bot messages trying to catfish me. And if anybody doesn't know what catfishing is, it's basically when a bot pretends they're a human, goes after a man in order to get them to do compromising things on video, and then blackmail the men. So it does happen for men, but it happens just like the scale it happens for women is like way, way more. Why do you think that is?
I feel like you really have to ask a woman. Yeah. Again, I haven't lived inside there, but I think it is, men are socialized in a very specific way to, hit on people they don't know. Men commit almost all violent crime. So it's natural some of that bleeds over on the internet.
And then for men, we don't receive nearly as much, and when we do receive it, and it's in a different form, which is really interesting. So going back to that question of this AI, how will with deepfakes and with just like what is AI?
Those are two different questions. Regarding just whether AI makes it harder for us to understand what's real, there's basically been two big advancements in the past 2 years, and one of them is deepfakes, or other people call them generative adversarial networks. And it makes it a lot harder to produce, makes it a lot easier to produce images and audio and video that looks real. And that's the first advancement. And the second one is in language modeling. When you have your phone and you're typing and it has an autocorrect that predicts your next word, that's a language model. And if you build one that's big enough and good enough, it can recite entire paragraphs that look like they're real. And OpenAI, this beautiful AI nonprofit that I think went corporate recently. They produced this giant language model called GPT-2. And they actually said it was so powerful that they wanted to withhold it from the public because all of these people running bots could now produce entire paragraphs or essays that look realistic. Although if you dig deep in on a whole paragraph, maybe it doesn't make sense yet, but it's very close.
And what does this mean? Does this mean that a bunch of writers are about to be put out of work?
So I went to this natural language processing conference in June, and I was trying to get all the researchers to laugh at the idea that we should make a movie studio from these, language model scripts or something. You just set it off on something like 50 Shades of Grey, and it makes a brand new script that isn't under copyright. Of course, we're many, many, many years away from doing that for real, but it is scary how good these models are. And if you sift through enough of the output, and it makes infinite output, right? I mean, you can run it forever. If you sift through enough of it, you do get a lot of stuff that makes sense.
Does that sifting happen also through software, or do you have to manually sift?
So historically manually, but just in the last week or so, there's this huge paper on text summarization. And the amazing flex that the authors had is the abstract of the paper was actually the output of their own summarization algorithm. And we've never seen something like that before. People have been trying to do summarization for 20 years, but now we're getting something that a human could have written. And that is scary. If you stack all of these models together, you build a video deepfake, and the script is from a language model, and you edit it with summarization. Pretty soon, you get something that's a complete machine, no human intelligence. But unless you really dig in, you won't notice.
And that we've already been starting to see that with, I think it was Sequoia investing in an artificial influencer, and that's just weird. But it makes sense from their standpoint. I'm sure they're probably making money. But it's just so weird. It's so cyberpunk. It's so like, what does this mean? I have from this conversation, I have no idea what this means for in the next 5 years of me. I'm writing, I'm producing videos. All of this stuff can be faked. What should I hire or should I build a fake version of Stewart and then like train models on adapting what I write and then what does this mean?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably companies out there trying to do that where, they take your own writing or they summarize it, or another big advancement in AI is style transfer, taking your text and making it look like it came from the Bible, or Shakespeare or something where, they're also writing English text really, similar to you would, but it's they can transfer your style. And people are doing style transfer for images, taking your selfies and making them look like Van Gogh portraits.
A friend of mine was trying to do that for paintings and then sell those paintings, which was pretty interesting. And so how do you know that it isn't hype right now, that we're actually are close to this? I mean, you've already been explaining a bit about why it's not hype, but why are you so convinced that right now is the difference?
We're starting to see, real economic results. Facebook benefits from having superhuman facial recognition, all of those photos and tagging and metadata that makes Facebook the #1 platform that allows them to sell those ads. And there are more direct applications of applying computer vision to MRIs or CT scans or self-driving cars. For decades, AI basically didn't make money, but now it's really about to.
Mm. And are you paying attention much to what's going on in terms of China? And it seems like you read a lot of these papers.
Yeah.
Are you reading papers that come out from China? Are they in English? Do you have access to that?
Yeah, I mean, scientists, around the world all communicate in English. It's what they have to do. Although, as the world gets bigger, I think people are publishing more things in their native languages.
And it seems like what you're taught, this technology will make it easier to do cross language border things as well. Like you publish your paper in English, and then it can also translate into Chinese. Is there much translation being done into these natural language processing?
Well, of course, there's things like Google Translate, and it's a truly amazing demonstration of these neural networks and language models translating from something like more than 100 languages. I don't know if we're ready to do that on scientific papers that are full of
jargon,
equations, and jargon and whatnot. But it's not hard to imagine that a search engine would help you find documents that are in different languages.
So I'm going to bring in a piece that I learned from this book called Range. In this book, Range talks about how over-specialization is not necessarily the best thing to do. And a key argument that he has is that we, as human beings, our IQ, our measures of natural intelligence, or our measures of genetic intelligence. I don't mean to say that IQ is actually that important of a metric, but IQ is not changing from generation to generation. But the thing that is changing from generation to generation is our ability to work with abstract concepts. So each generation of younger people gets better and better at kind of having a much larger library of abstract concepts, language that they can work with and they can communicate with. And so what you're bringing into this makes me approach that with a very interesting idea, which is like, what is if the computers can get so good at dealing with abstract concepts and creating abstract concepts, how will human intelligence shift in order to adapt to that? And I'll give an example, because us at our age, we grew up with Google, and Google allowed us to we adapted to Google in that, that information isn't so important anymore. Like that one piece of information isn't important. We can just go look it up. And I'm sure as an engineer, you're even more on that side. And so we adapted to Google. How will we adapt to AI? Where does that go in terms of what we humans will start to focus on?
Yeah, I think software engineers have already been living this kind of life. In the very beginning, all of these CPUs and processors had programming languages that were, very simple, assembly languages. And they were hard for humans to program in because it was just so, you move this data from here to there, very tedious instructions that didn't map to what you wanted to do for your business. And then over time, we built higher level languages that translated better to English, that let us encapsulate sort of business objects or transactions in human readable ways. And then a program called a compiler translates it back to what the CPU understands, the simple assembly language. So now we have this high level language, and then a piece of software that translates it to the low level language. And in the beginning, this sucked. The generated code was very slow. It's not what we would have written directly, but these compilers got better and better. Their own little form of AI in a sense. And now they produce better assembly than almost all human programmers. And so back in the day, we'd look at the slow assembly, and then we'd tweak what the compiler put out, or try to repair it and make it go faster. And now it's the other way around. The compiler tells us how to go faster.
And people have been talking about this for a long time, which is essentially when will we be able to write code that writes itself, essentially, right?
And depending on your definition, we're already there. I know other people don't mean it that way, but it is true that these optimizing compilers come up with structures and patterns that I don't even know that I'm programming with.
And you can't peer into them. It seems similar to the analogy of like we don't really know why SSRI antidepressants work, or we don't really know why a lot of medicines work. We just know that they work. And it's a similar type of thing that's happening with engineering. You can't, you're doing things that you don't understand how
I have to push back on that. I shouldn't have said that so literally. Engineers invented the compiler. We have a completely perfect understanding of how it works. We can read both the high level and the low level languages. We do have an understanding of what's going on, especially if you are an expert. But it is true that for most of these optimizations, most of us wouldn't come up with them by ourselves unprompted. But again, if we dig into the source code of the compiler, which is usually available for free, and we dig into the output it gives us, we can see its thought process.
So you could find out, you could investigate and figure out what happened if you got a result that was unexpected.
Yeah, and it's part of our training. I took a university course in compilers where we had to write one, and it was I had to understand why my compiler worked or didn't. I had to really get the whole pipeline working.
That's so interesting.
So SSRIs are a little different in that we didn't make the brain at all, and we didn't make really the SSRI either.
That is really interesting. I want to go back to this question of how has your life changed, or how have you adapted to? So you're one step further from me. I've just got Google. It's changing the way that I ask questions, and it's changing the way that I use abstract concepts and language. You going one step further and actually like being in a job where it requires you to have a large range of abstract concepts. How has that changed your ability to live or have fun or learn? What has it done to your life?
So in a very narrow sense, when we tried to build AI algorithms in the past for facial recognition, we would do studies on how far apart the eyes were, or sort of patterns and outlines. And now we don't bother with that. We have so much data that the computer finds out what matters. And in some sense, I program less for that, and I don't understand what faces are really like.
And what is your job then? What is your job becoming?
Shaping that sort of mountain and valleys in a smoother way, but without the domain understanding of what faces are like, or what voices are like, or what text is like. It's easier to get the algorithm going with the basics and have it teach itself.
So you're shifting your view to a meta view, basically. So you're going back meta, which makes sense for what humanity does, because that's the part that computers won't be able to do for a long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the very basic measurements of what a face is like took a lot of human effort, and even then they were still imperfect. I was still we weren't getting all of the signals that we could have been. And now the computer does that, and now we think we can detect faces. What do we do with them? Now we think more about the business.
Okay, so here's a question that you'd probably be pretty good at answering. What will the effect of AI be on business in the next 2 years?
In the next 2 years, that's the hardest interval to predict.
Why?
2 years ago, I would never predicted today. Actually, funny past story. In late 2016, I went to this machine learning conference, and I saw all of this work on language models. And my best friend and I quit our job to start a company applying this to customer support tickets. We wanted to build an email client where we searched every email that came in and tried to find the answer in your company's internal database, or in past emails, or even on Google. And it was hard, for classic startup reasons, but also because the machine learning was not as far as I hoped in 2017.
Now it is.
But yeah, now it's about to be 2020. And again, we have these giant models like GPT-2 and such a deeper mathematical understanding, and the computers are all faster and cheaper. And now I'm kicking myself because maybe now is the right time, but I was just 2 years too early.
And okay, so I've got a whole bunch of different ideas that are coming. We could go for this one. One is geopolitics and the effect of AI on geopolitics, state governments running, how important this technology is to national interests. And then the other one is timing of business and how this kind of feedback loop that we were talking about is making the timing of business so important. But it's also crazy because you go on Product Hunt and all of a sudden, you have an idea, and then you go on Product Hunt and 20 other people have already done it already. So it's like, what either one you want to go down, what do you feel like most interesting to talk about?
So national security, or how this affects governments. The big example I give is that, in the aftermath of World War II, both America and the Soviet Union tried to capture as many Nazi scientists as they could. And then, we put our Nazis to work building rockets and ultimately creating a lot of the early innovations that got us to the moon. And it's amazing to think, what if the Soviets got all of the scientists? What if we were just behind on that and the Soviets got to the moon? And I think we're about to lose the war on AI talent. So much of the good talent is in Canada, and they have come to America to work at Google or something. But if we really care, the best AI talent should have been in America to begin with. To say nothing about the talent that China's developing.
Well, this gets into something really interesting so you've got the China part, and China is the only country with a very, very firm border around its internet. The rest of the world is open in its nature of the business. That might open in its nature of the internet. That might start to change very soon. We might start to see a lot more national borders around different countries. But until that happens, it's almost like a virtual space of intelligence. So the fact that there's a bunch of people in Canada who are really good at AI might not necessarily mean that U.S. citizens don't get access to that. It means that U.S. government probably doesn't get access to their intelligence. But this is an interesting concept that's coming up to me right now. Is just this how is the online virtual network of intelligence changing national interests? What do you think about that?
So obviously we're cool with the Canadians, and many of them do come to America because all of the big industrial labs are here at Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Autodesk and so many other companies. But if you just compare the size of the American economy to the Canadian economy, it shouldn't even be a contest. The best researchers should have been incubated in America. And the fact that it's not really as true as we hope is a bad sign given how big we are.
This is a personal question, but what is the best book that gives an accurate representation of what AI is, and then also applies that to geopolitics?
And also applies to the geopolitics. That's a really tough one.
There's one book I have in mind and I can't remember the name of it, but it goes into China, America, and AI war, the coming AI war, some book like that. But I was just wondering if you know of any specific books that give an accurate representation of artificial intelligence, because I know it's a word that people throw around a lot, but
like I said, it's hard to predict just the next couple of years, and geopolitics is even harder to predict. I think 3 years ago, no one was thinking about these Russian bots. There were definitely a couple of activists that accurately predicted what was going to happen, but the hysteria that we see now, it just wasn't in place then. And if you interviewed me then, I wouldn't have guessed it.
Mm. And this is an interesting thing that I talked about with Nicholas Bryzowitz from the Long Now Foundation. We had a conversation about technology and the kind of techlash and how that started in the 1800s, 1700s with Luddites, and actually Heidegger has started this philosophical inquiry into what backlash is. And so we don't know what's going to happen, and our uncertainty seems to be getting greater and greater the more the more this feedback loop tightens. Our uncertainty about what will happen. You know, it was pretty easy 2,000 years ago to predict what would happen in our lives for the next 100 years, like work on a farm, go to sleep at night, get up in the morning, work on a farm again. You know, maybe a ruler changes, there's war, something like that. That was unpredictable. Weather was unpredictable. But now the whole thing seems to be getting more unpredictable. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm sort of a technology maximalist. You know, I want as much technological development, you know, probably a lot more than anyone else. But I do have, you know, we do have to recognize that a lot of people feel like power has been taken away from them, whether or not that's true. You know, I think Facebook and Twitter has empowered the average person to actually reach an audience of millions, but it also has influenced a lot of people for the worse.
And we as human beings tend to societally pick on the worst and bring out the worst as an example of the truth. But in reality, it's just kind of a subjective choice to whether to look at the worst or look at the best, which I find interesting. Being a technology maximalist, what do you see wrong with being a technology maximalist, if anything?
It's bad marketing. It's, you know, no one really wants to hear maximalist these days. It also sounds very emotionally cold. When you are a maximalist with technology, often, you know, you don't look like you're listening to people.
And I remember a previous guest, Michelle Singh, she was working on AI that was helped as a therapist. And she brought up an interesting point, which I haven't been able to refute, which is that humans are judgmental. And if therapy provides a non-judgmental space, and if that's the key ingredient to therapy, then artificial intelligence and technology might actually be a better form of therapy because it is non-judgmental. What do you think about that?
I don't know if we can guarantee that it's non-judgmental. We would have to have, you know, thousands of conversations with it, and have therapists review them, and then have therapists review each other. You know, it's being non-judgmental is a subjective thing, and it's entirely possible for 999 people to have a good experience with a robot therapist, and then for the 100th one, the robot therapist is racist or something. I mean, we again, these are big boxes of, you know, numbers and fractions, and we can't really peer inside them. We can peer inside a compiler, but not a neural network.
What do you mean by that? We can't peer inside a neural network?
So they basically all look like, you know, spreadsheets that are little matrices of numbers. And when you do matrix multiplication, it, you know, basically takes us one step forward in the path to the mountain. But once again, we don't know where the mountain is, and the exact direction that these numbers take us is not clear ahead of time, or we don't know the rules in the general case on when it, you know, it takes a step to the left or when it takes a step to the right.
Interesting. How has your life been affected by technology? We've already kind of touched on a little bit, but what are some of the benefits that technology has brought into your life?
Well, so I used to work at Uber, and I always give, you know, Uber as this wonderful example of, you know, technology doing good. And it's funny just because so many people hate Uber, and it's such an unpopular take for me to say to other people. But it is this, you know, very slow application of AI, where in the beginning it was just Travis texting a black car driver and there's no AI. And now there's all of these algorithms so that when a driver finishes a trip, they have another one immediately, and they're not waiting or not making money. and there is algorithms and data science for safety and anti-fraud, and keeping the platform, letting everyone trust the platform more. And every rollout of one of these features, shows us the benefit of models and technology.
And how has that affected your life in a positive way?
Well, it makes Uber rides a whole lot cheaper. It especially in in kind of conditions that would otherwise be dangerous, like inclement weather, or if you're drunk, or whatnot. Something like 50 million people have benefited from this platform, and it would all be slower and more expensive if we couldn't tune these models to make everything more efficient.
Mm. And so you're saying that your life has gotten faster and more efficient through this.
Yeah, I've personally taken a couple thousand Uber rides, and I know people that have done even more. Mm. And of course, it's an even bigger benefit to the drivers.
What do you mean?
Well, they just do more rides in a day, right? I only do 2 rides in a day, but a driver could easily do 20. Mm. And they directly make money from it. These algorithms maximize how much money Uber makes, but it splits all of that evenly with linearly with the driver, sort of like 1/3 to 3/4. So we all make money together.
And it seemed like a couple of years ago that Uber was really basing a lot of their projections on self-driving cars coming about much quicker than they are. Is that an accurate representation?
So I don't want to speak for the company exactly, but I don't think anyone at the company truly thought we would get to 100% autonomy in 2 years or something like that. The common thing I heard was that you can imagine the self-driving car taking on 0.5% of trips, and then we make it better and it does 1% of trips, and then 2% of trips. Very, very easy trips that go in a straight line. It would be extremely safe, and it just does that route 30 times a day. And it would go slowly enough that it would probably be slower than driver churn. So no individual driver is ever replaced. The car just comes in to supplement or I guess take over for drivers that have gone on to do something else, or they've found work elsewhere. Mm.
And I didn't mean to ask that question specifically about Uber. My real question I wanted to get into was, why is it taking longer for self-driving cars to do their thing?
I think a lot of the big players wanted the self-driving car to drive everywhere. Like they truly wanted to deploy at 100%. I think now we do have the technology to do 1% of trips. Mm. Don't quote me on that. I don't speak on behalf of anyone. Mm-hmm. But the marketing that definitely Tesla has is that this autopilot will eventually take you everywhere, and they're really betting the farm on just that. And the same thing with Google. Google doesn't Waymo doesn't have any human drivers. They if they start a ride sharing service, unless they only want to go in straight lines, or hire human drivers, they really want to get to 100%, and that's their goal. There's definitely smaller startups that there's one that only serves retirement communities, and not a whole lot of traffic there, or college campuses.
What are those called? Do you know what those ones are called?
I'm sorry, I don't remember the names.
Yeah, I'm just going to write it down. An example of.
But yeah, people are deploying autonomous vehicles on the safest roads possible, and they're getting somewhere.
And so, in these specific use cases, there are fully self-driving cars, like end to end? Do you know?
Well, I haven't ridden in one, but I imagine that any real deployment of self-driving cars will have a remote driver that can take over. It's one of these things where if you're, in your self-driving car and it starts raining and your car gets confused, you would like someone to take over driving. maybe in a Tesla, that's you, but in a Waymo vehicle, it would have to be someone that's not in the car.
Hmm. And that's the interesting thing about being in San Francisco. And there are all these cruise vehicles all over the place. And they've got these engineers, they've got like 3 engineers in all these cars. And it's so interesting. And now knowing that, self-driving cars are going to take a little bit longer to fully come to the market than we had expected. It's so funny watching them, because I think like you're paying them engineer salaries. And so it's probably not profitable from a, like, if they're just trying to take a competitor to Uber type of standpoint. Here's a question I want to ask. You don't have to answer it, because this would be a question that is specific to Uber. How much of Uber's business is actually making money off of the rides, as opposed to the data surrounding the rides, the machine learning IP that they're creating, all this different stuff? Do you feel comfortable answering that question?
So actually, I want to jump in on the last thing you said.
Sure.
I can't speak for Cruise specifically, but a lot of these companies don't have engineers in the front seats.
Interesting.
They're just driving. There's one person hovering over the steering wheel, and there's another person looking at the laptop to make sure the car is about to recognize the stoplight that's approaching.
So those aren't engineers. They used to be engineers, but they're no longer engineers anymore in the car.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of, I guess, like operations people or, non-technical people, they just have to be able to read the laptop.
That's so interesting. And what about the other
your next question? Yeah.
Yeah, so how much of the business of Uber, and we don't have to just call it Uber either, how much of the business of Lyft, how much of the business of Facebook even, is the way that they create the money now, as opposed to the way that they can potentially create the money through IP of machine learning, or in the case of data, like where people are going, like what are the important data points, like anything in that general area? What do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to disentangle them, because Uber's data science operation very directly serves rides and food delivery and freight forwarding. In the future, there's so many things that Uber can do. I'm not saying we've thought of them or anything, but marketing for businesses like bars, getting an idea for them on how much traffic they can expect in the future, whether they're sort of growing or shrinking in terms of in a city population-wide level. Are they no longer in a hot part of town? Uber's been very resistant to advertising. They philosophically don't believe themselves as a Facebook, where they try to sell you things, but location-based advertising has always been kind of an idea that maybe people outside of the company have thought of.
Yeah, and I'm sure people are outside the company being like, I want access to that data that they must have, because that would make my life so much easier. That's really interesting. So we got like 5 minutes left. Are you talking about the company you're making? Is it in stealth? What are you doing?
It is still in stealth. It is a consumer tech company applying AI to sort of the media space. Not going to say what it is, but something like movie studios or record labels or traditional media makers haven't been able to use AI, and I think I figured something out. But it's going to take another 6 months for me to tell people.
And are you working with anybody else?
No comment. There's always friends that help out now and then, but it's still not very official yet.
Okay. And it'll be the final question. What is the effect on human creativity of artificial intelligence?
That's such a hard question. I mean, I guess like for music or movies, a lot of what we see now is formulaic. And I think AI can help us make bets that are a little more ambitious, or allow us to create special effects or sort of like music mastering that we haven't been able to do before.
How has it impacted your personal creativity?
Well, I'm an engineer. I'm not creative at all.
No, no, I would,
I don't make music or movies or
no, no,
anything.
so I would highly disagree with that. I'm going to give my spiel that I usually give to people about creativity. So, most people assign creativity into this box of artists and everything like that. There are several different versions of creativity. One of those, I guess that would be the arts. That would be considered part of the arts. But I believe that every human individual is creative, because if you think about it, we're creating our reality as we speak. It's my brain is looking at these things all around me, and then it's dumbing down what's actually there by a factor of 10, and creating an image inside of my head. And the same thing works for every other sense. So just based on our very basic humanity, we are creative individuals. And then I would say an engineer is highly creative because you are creating things. You're using what other people have built, and then you're putting those into new conglomerations, new combinations, and then you're even creating your own software as well. So given that sense of creativity, how has it impacted your creativity?
Yeah, so I mean, just for writing prose, there's all these cute little tools like Grammarly or Google Translate. For writing code, there's more and more tools that give you hints on where's the right way to go. Stuff like static analysis or IntelliSense or the optimizing compilers we've talked about. There's a dozen startups trying to help you search through code, or the whole no-code movement. There's 100 companies in the space.
That's really interesting. So anything else you think would be really valuable for my audience to understand about artificial intelligence before we end?
Don't be scared. In the long run, we all get a tool that makes us more powerful.
I love that. All right, cool. And how can people find out more about you and what you're working on once it's live?
You can follow me on Twitter. My username is RISHMISHRA.
How do you say that?
Rish Mishra.
Okay, Rish Mishra. Cool. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been really.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.